experience in other places, it's just been my own experience. So this is, you guys all know this is my first synagogue working. Most that I've seen here have been the plain wooden casket. I don't know whether or not they've been embalmed, but I'm guessing not. It's also where, what tradition are you coming from? I think for a lot of people, who do grow up Jewish and who've seen this for everyone, it's what's expected. For people who grew up seeing different, I understand it's a lot harder. But I think there is something beautiful to the natural elements of the Jewish burial. Just like we don't rush, and I know we haven't talked about like end-of-life decision-making, but what ends up happening is you can't, traditionally, right, euthanasia would not be allowed. You can't do anything to speed up the process of dying. What you can do is remove things that are keeping someone from dying. The story in the Talmud is that if there's a bird outside, or I think it's a woodpecker, right? That if there's a woodpecker that's woodpecking, when someone is in the process of dying, that you can shoo away the woodpecker, because that noise would be keeping someone, right, focused and keeping them alive. Or there's a story about a rabbi who was in great pain, who was dying, and all of his students were down below praying for him to stay alive. And one of his servants took a pot and threw the pot off the roof to distract the students so they would stop praying. And he died when they stopped praying. And that was viewed as a good thing to do. So not speeding things up, but also not slowing things down. And through the natural burial, right, with a wooden casket, no embalming, what it does is it makes the natural process happen naturally rather than slowing it down. Does that make sense? Okay.
So do Jewish, the living will and to be on life support, is that something that's discussed? Is that
Yeah. And again, it's not that, it's very tricky. Definitely feeding tubes and artificial breathing and everything is allowed. Healing is one of the top commandments that we have. If you save a life, it's as if you've saved an entire world. If you destroy a life, it's as if you've destroyed an entire world. But at the same time, when it is those artificial things that are keeping someone alive, there's leniency and allowance for removing. But it's tricky. Like feeding is different than breathing is different. So, but again, this is another case where we can say this is the strict answer, but it's also realizing that there's a lot more that goes into it. I talk about, and not just in this area, in general, I talk about the Jewish law that is Reformed Jews. Our goal is to make Jewish law a voice in our decision-making process. The difference in other is that it's not the voice, right? It's not the only thing impacting how we make our decisions, but as opposed to how some would look at it, it's not something to be ignored completely either. It's something that we should consider in deciding what we're going to do. It's a lot harder, right? In a lot of ways, it makes being a Reformed Jew much more difficult because you have to understand everything, right? Technically, you have to know why things are the way they are, and then decide what role that's going to play in your life. It's a lot easier to say I'm not going to do anything, or to say I'm just going to do everything and I don't care why, right? Okay. Oh, look, I have put it in here. I didn't even remember that. All right, so I don't have to do the next paragraph, right? Because we just did all that. Then, mourning begins So if traditionally, right, even if there's a week in between, which even in traditional understanding, there were different reasons why that might happen. One is not considered to be a mourner until the burial. Okay? So Shiva, and the word for 7 is Sheva, right? So Shiva is, or it's also sitting. Sheva is just, that's embarrassing. I think it comes from sitting. I should know that. Don't tell anyone.
What is city?
Shiva, like Sheva.
Shiva came from Shiva. It's a part
So
of,
which one is it?
it's from 7.
It is from 7.
Yeah, it's from 7.
Okay, thank you. But, right, the sitting would make sense because what Shiva is that once the burial has taken place, the idea is the mourner shouldn't have to worry about anything, right? So mirrors are covered. Really, you don't change clothing, you don't bathe, you don't wear perfume. Right? It's really a lot of what we've talked about for the fast days when we talked about Yom Kippur, except you do eat. But what you shouldn't have to do is worry about what you're going to eat. So another mitzvah, right, one of our commandments, one of the things that we do is taking care of the bereaved. Which is why, and again, this isn't unique to Judaism, but the custom of bringing food to the home of a mourner is so that they shouldn't have to worry about providing for themselves. So it says here in a mourner is forbidden to eat of his own bread for the first day of mourning. Right? So at least for that first day, everything the mourner eats should be provided by the community. Interesting, in addition to all of the things that a mourner is not supposed to do, right? Manual labor, conducting business transactions, bathing, anointing the body, that's perfume, deodorant, cutting the hair, cohabiting, wearing leather, washing clothes, greeting acquaintances, and studying Torah. One is not supposed to study Torah when they're mourning, but they can, if they want, read Job, Lamentations, and other sorrowful portions. There's a tradition when a scholar dies that the entire Talmud should be studied by the community. And they actually sell you, it's little paperback books that have different sections of Talmud broken up for when a scholar dies, that the little books can be handed out to all the different members of the community so each one can study that little part and fulfill that tradition. All right, so this is for 7 days, right? Coming from what we saw Jacob do and what was done for Jacob. Then, remember when Aaron died, the community mourned for 30 days. So the next is Shloshim. But the 7 days are included. Okay, so when the 7 days are up for the next 23 days, there are still restrictions, but the restrictions are less severe. The mourner may return to work, but is forbidden to attend joyous events, weddings, concerts, or to embark on a business journey or participate in social gatherings. So these days, right, the Shiva and the Shloshim are parent, sibling, spouse, child. But for the child, it's going to go even further. Now it says here, So I think it's 11 months. No, I know it says 12 months here. Well, and I'll tell you where the 11 months comes from. So the child refrains from all of these things for a year. So you'll see, really like weddings, concerts, someone who is observing the traditional mourning period when their parents passed away won't hear live music for that entire year. I think, do I talk about Kaddish? In our prayer book, there's a prayer called the Kaddish, Kaddish. It means praise, and there are several times in the service where the Kaddish appears. It's really a divider in the service, and there are different kinds of Kaddishes. There's a half Kaddish, a full Kaddish, but one of them is a Kaddish for mourners, Kaddish Yaton, right? We call it the mourners' Kaddish in English, I guess, except it's Kaddish, right? And the mourner's Kaddish is traditionally said by mourners, okay? So the times when you would say Kaddish would be when your direct relative has passed away, if it is your child, your sibling, or your spouse, you would say that mourner's Kaddish for the 30 days, okay? The child would say the Kaddish every day for the year, and then all of the mourners would say that Kaddish on the yahrzeit, or the anniversary of the death, okay? I think you'll see where all of these mourners will say the Kaddish for the year after too, but the only one bound by it is the child, okay? Yeah?
I guess the person that dies is not Jewish, but you are, like your parent,
Mm-hmm.
or...
I'm not sure traditionally, I don't know, but I would say that as the mourner, if this is how, you want to mourn, then yes. Okay, and here we read non-Jewish relatives, when we read our yahrzeit list, we have no problem reading non-Jewish relatives of our members. Yeah.
What is the thing of having, after you leave the cemetery, having a pitcher and bowl outside the house?
Okay, so so the cemetery, right? Do you remember when I talked about the ritual hand washing before we eat? Same thing, when you leave a cemetery, you're said to be unclean. So they have the hand washing, just like you would have before you eat, as you exit the cemetery. And traditionally, you would do a ritual hand washing when you leave. That also I guess it's good to know, this is again not observed in Reform Judaism, but there's the Kohen, right, or Kohanim are said to be descendants of the priests. And one of the limitations of a Kohen is that you cannot come into contact with the dead. So I don't know how often this is followed in conservative, but for Orthodox Jews, right, if you are a Kohen, I think there's an exception for